Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive shakeup. We are looking at Ontario's proposed legislation aimed at completely restructuring how school boards govern, how they spend, and ultimately how they educate. So let's just dive right into it, because the proposed Putting Student Achievement First Act of 2026 represents a huge shift in the landscape of Ontario's education system. Let's start with a massive number that really defines the current state of education in the province, and ask a pretty simple question. When you allocate tens of billions of dollars toward a public system, where exactly does all that money go? $30.3 billion. That's the record-breaking amount in core education funding Ontario is investing for the 2025-26 school year. It's a staggering figure, honestly. The government's stated goal here is to ensure schools can deliver high-quality education, support student success, and prepare them for the jobs of tomorrow. But as we'll see, pouring money into the top of the funnel doesn't always guarantee it actually reaches the bottom. Because when oversight breaks down, well, we start to see where some of those funds actually end up. While the province is investing billions, government audits have flagged that some trustees have diverted funds away from the classroom. For example, at the Brant-Haldimand Norfolk Catholic Board, trustees spent nearly $190,000 on a trip to Italy to purchase art, eat at fine dining restaurants, and stay in high-end hotels. At the Toronto Catholic Board, one trustee used almost $7,000 in public funds for personal electronics like iPads, AirPods, and Europe SIM cards. Section 1. The Education Funding Paradox. To really get why the government is pushing this new legislation, we have to look at a striking paradox between record inputs and lagging outputs. On one hand, we're seeing incredible investments, like the 179 new schools built since 2018. But on the other hand, the academic returns just aren't matching up. According to the latest EQAO test results, particularly in grade 9 math, student scores are simply not improving fast enough to satisfy the province. So, this massive gap between record funding and lagging classroom success, it's basically set off alarm bells. It has forced the province to put an unprecedented 8 school boards under direct government supervision in less than a year due to financial mismanagement and severe governance concerns. Section 2. Reining in school trustees. To fix what the province identifies as a complete governance breakdown, the proposed act targets the people elected to oversee these local boards, the trustees. The province points to hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars swallowed up, not by students or teachers, but by legal fees fighting internal disputes between trustees and boards. We're talking over $340,000 at the York Catholic Board, $300,000 at Grand Erie, and $175,000 at Hastings and Prince Edward. This kind of infighting just drains resources and distracts from the core educational mission. To put a stop to this, the Act proposes some truly sweeping changes. Currently, there's a lot of unrestricted spending and bloated boards. Take the massive 22-trustee board at the Toronto District School Board, which the province argues just fosters more conflict. The future state? Strict discretionary expense caps, a maximum $10,000 limit on trustee honorariums, and shrinking that Toronto board down to a much leaner 12 trustees. Section 3. Splitting the top job. Okay, this next part is arguably the biggest structural change in the whole thing, and it revolves around who actually runs the school boards day to day. Currently, a single director of education is tasked with managing both the complex business operations and the academic programming of a board. The new act proposes splitting this into 2 highly specialized roles to make sure both sides of the house get the expert attention they need. First up, we have the Chief Executive Officer, or CEO. This role effectively replaces the traditional Director of Education. What's unique here is that the CEO specifically requires business and financial qualifications. Their mandate is strictly to oversee administration, balance those budgets, ensure resources are used strategically, and keep the organization operationally sustainable. Then, reporting directly to the CEO would be the brand new Chief Education Officer, or CEDO. Their sole focus is academic programming, student safety, and teaching practices. And unlike the CEO, the CEDO requires strict pedagogical credentials, like an Ontario College of Teachers certification. Now, you might be wondering, how does this actually work with the elected trustees? Well, to protect these new corporate leaders from local political pushback, trustees would still have the power to hire the CEO. But firing the CEO, that would now require direct approval from the Minister of Education. The CEO then hires the CEO, though it's worth noting a CEO who happens to be duly qualified in both business and education could potentially hold both roles. Section 4. Professionalizing board operations. This whole thing goes way beyond just fancy new leadership titles. The legislation wants to fundamentally shift operational power away from elected politicians and straight into the hands of these newly appointed professionals. Let's look at budgeting, for instance. Currently, trustees are responsible for the budget, but they frequently struggle to reach a consensus, which end up delaying operations. Under the new rules, the CEO will lead budget development using their financial expertise. And if the trustees still can't agree to pass it, the matter is simply bumped up to the minister for a final decision. We're seeing a very similar shift when it comes to union bargaining. Right now, trustees are the final decision makers negotiating provincial labor talks. The government's plan is to replace them at the central bargaining table with professional school board staff. The Council of Ontario Directors of Education, or CODE, would be designated as the central employer bargaining agency. That brings a much more system-level, operational approach to those negotiations. And it doesn't stop there. This push for professionalization extends right into infrastructure. Right now, capital projects suffer from massive delays. Just look at the Near North Board. They were put under supervision after high school students had to start their year in a half-demolished building due to project mismanagement. The future state gives the minister sweeping powers to override local boards, redirect projects, or even parachute in third-party project managers to just ensure the schools actually get built. The province is also drawing a hard line on board communications. Currently, some school board officials use official channels to weigh in on divisive global and geopolitical issues. The future state allows the minister to issue policies that restrict official communications strictly to day-to-day school functions. Now, personal accounts aren't covered by these rules, but anything bearing the board's name absolutely must stay focused on education.
Section 5. Back to the classroom.
So when you take a step back and look at all these sweeping financial, governance, and structural changes, the new titles, the expense caps, the centralized bargaining, it really all boils down to one single stated goal. The intention is to ensure that every single dollar bypassed by mismanagement makes its way directly back to the student and the classroom. The government's entire premise here is that when the boardroom functions professionally, the classroom thrives.
To really drive this home, the Act rolls out mandates that hit right at the student level. It mandates consistent, curriculum-aligned learning resources so teachers aren't stuck independently sourcing materials. It brings in mandatory written secondary school exams, heavily promotes attendance, and even removes certain school survey requirements just to cut down on the red tape for educators. So here's the ultimate question we're left with as we wrap up this explainer. Will tighter budgets, fancy new corporate titles like CEO, and more centralized power actually translate to better test scores for Ontario students? Because ultimately, the true success of the Putting Student Achievement First Act rests entirely on whether professionalizing the boardroom can actually improve the daily reality inside the classroom. Thank you so much for learning with me today, and I'll leave you to think about that very question.